Now, for family offices, the challenge is to not act upon those fears, but to try and take a step back from the noise of the present day, the uncertainty of the present day, and really reflect on the values that guide them.
Hello and welcome to this week's Tea Break. I'm Al-Enazi, joined as always by my co-host Yuri. Today we're thrilled to be speaking with Louise Tumchewics, author and visiting fellow at the Centre for War Studies at the University of Southern Denmark, who has advised numerous international organisations and financial institutions on global trade patterns. Louise, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I have to start by asking, what tea have you gone for?
Today I've gone with an English breakfast tea with a splash of milk, because in these uncertain geopolitical times, I just need to keep calm and carry on.
I've gone for the extra strong black tea today, a slice of lemon, a nice spoon of sugar to keep me going through these difficult times, because there's so much to cover. We had the very well-known judge who dropped into our offices last week, Judge Mark Wolf, talking about the changing judicial atmosphere in the US, which was absolutely fascinating. Is there any respect left in the White House for international law and the rule of law in general?
Well, Yuri, I think what we saw in Alaska with the recent summit was really a piece of political theater, starring two individuals who don't have any particular respect for international law. For Vladimir Putin, it's part of a Western system of rules that he doesn't believe need to apply to Russia. And for Donald Trump, that's an individual who understands diplomacy in terms of a real estate deal, rather than looking at the subtleties and intricacies of international law and the responsibilities and obligations thereof. The Constitution Convention of 1787, taking us way back. Benjamin Franklin was asked what this new entity was. Was it a monarchy or was it a republic? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And maintaining the strength of the constitutional republic requires respect for the rule of law and respect for the different roles and boundaries of the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of power. What we're seeing with President Trump is an acceleration and an intensification of a trend that already existed for several decades of concentration of power in the executive. What we've seen over the past few months is this rule by executive order and the abuse of federal powers and federal agencies.
And I'm glad you've mentioned 1787, because we've also been looking at examples from history. We've been looking at whatever happened to common sense, and that's 1776.
I think you're referring to the article on Thomas Paine, author of Common Sense in 1776, advocating for US independence from Britain. During the American Revolution, Paine says, these are the times that try men's souls. So a powerful statement there. I guess, should we be reflecting on his fears today, 250 years later?
Absolutely. I think we could also say that present times are times that try men's souls. We do go through these periods of upheaval and uncertainty. And what Paine's talking about in stirring up emotions, we see emotions being stirred up now with speculation, sort of angst-ridden headlines, what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, and that can stir up a lot of fear. Now, for family offices, the challenge is to not act upon those fears, but to try and take a step back from the noise of the present day, the uncertainty of the present day, and really reflect on the values that guide them. Reflect on where they want to be, not 5 days from now, not 5 months from now, not 5 years from now, but 50 years from now.
Ali, you've done a lot of this reflection recently because you've been on a pilgrimage in the Middle East, in your homelands.
There's a sense of anxiety now, especially within the Iraqi people, because there's a growing push from the Americans for the Iraqis to disband the Popular Mobilization Force. But also there's a fear from the instability in Syria because of the sectarian tensions that might spiral into Iraq. And also in Lebanon, the constant calls for Hezbollah to lay down its weapons. So there's a sense of anxiety there within the region itself. There's I guess, a sense of enthusiasm about Dubai. Lots of talk on why Dubai is bustling and booming, and a lot of the private banks that I spoke to see a lot of interest. They're also tailoring it for the Indian clients as well, which are also trying to use Dubai as a hub itself as well, set base there. And, you know, we've seen this constant debate, Louise, in the wealth management world about which will be the leading Asian economy for growth, for innovation and asset allocation. Will it be India or China?
We've seen India go for the past 6 months from being a potential alternative to China for manufacturing, thinking of India as an alternative manufacturing destination for iPhones, for example. However, we woke up this morning to find that there's 50% tariffs on India today as punishment for continuing to purchase Russian oil despite U.S. sanctions. Trump is now quite supportive of Pakistan and its military leader. So we're really going to see probably an intensification of the rivalry that already exists between India and Pakistan, and regional instability between those three countries, India, Pakistan, and China.
And you've also been writing about these Asian giants. What did you find?
I've been looking a lot recently at the Pearl River Delta, the so-called Greater Bay Area. The wages there have gone up so much that a lot of those factories are not producing very much. And then, by contrast, if we look at Bangalore, where my son's girlfriend is from 7 million to 14 million in a few years, the size of the city's doubled. And there's other Indian cities that are also on that growth trajectory at the moment, and a lot of the analysis at the moment is about the source of energy and how much Russian oil they're buying. And I wanted to ask Louise, the eventual solution to the war in Ukraine, bearing in mind the connection of these economies with the Russian oil, will that solution come from the so-called developing economies and the global south rather than from Washington?
Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, is that for developing economies and the global south, their perspective has been that it is very much a European conflict. And that's reflected in voting patterns at the UN and also in just observance of US and European sanctions on Russian oil and other goods. I don't believe that a political solution to the war in Ukraine will come from the global south. That will be driven by Ukraine has to be at the table. Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine's European neighbors, and the United States. We will see, though, is that with the global south and the demand for agricultural products from Ukraine, Russian oil, when there is a political settlement, will continue to support those economies.
You're something of an expert on modern day and historical warfare. This rearmament trend, is this a long-term shift or a temporary anomaly?
NATO members' commitment to increasing defense spending and defense investment was announced and agreed upon at the recent NATO summit, is an indication that this is a trend that is going to continue. A 5% GDP commitment is a very significant one, particularly as many members have struggled to reach the 2% minimum threshold. It represents a longer-term commitment, partly because when we talk about increasing defense spending, increasing defense investment, major capital investments in weapons systems, these aren't projects that can be switched off easily. It is going to be a longer-term project. The challenge will be, however, particularly for European states, is as their workforce ages and as their demographics change, defense spending and other public spending, there will be a very fine balance to strike there. If we look at the recent discussions between Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and Chancellor Merz, that is a new cooperation on European defense, which is quite striking. So I think we will see countries making defense much more of a priority than it has been in previous decades.
And a lot more of your musings on these topics are discussed in your latest book, Louise, Small Armies, Big Cities, Rethinking Urban Warfare. And you've been having a lot of these discussions in the Middle East over tea. Is the tea's pretty good, I assume?
Oh, it's the best in the world.
It's
the best in the world. I don't think anyone can come close to the Middle Eastern tea. I certainly miss it.
And and some nice pastries as well.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe we should be bringing those into the
next time,
studio,
hopefully. And Louise, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's all from us this week. You can find this episode and all our others on the PWM website or over on our YouTube channel. If you've got questions for our guests, you'll find everything you need online. See you next week.